Chapter 12. Even though I had lost my memories, I was still well aware of my background. I came from a very average small-town family with several siblings, and I was the unlucky second oldest daughter with an older sister and a younger brother. Even from a young age, I knew that I could only rely on myself in this life. For a student like me who came from a small town, I was already very satisfied to get into a decent college and land a pretty good job. And yet, with conditions like these, Jonathan still claimed that I had signed a $100 million prenuptial agreement? I wasn't crazy. Jonathan's expression darkened when he saw me refusing to believe him. Are you unwilling to admit it, or have you just forgotten? I choked on my saliva. I absolutely couldn't let him know that I had lost my memories, or it would be even more troublesome to get a divorce. Of course I remember. Clearly, I was just joking. I stared him straight in the eyes. You know full well the kind of family and background I came from. Signing that kind of prenup with me, isn't that just taking advantage of me? Sure enough, he fell silent. I knew it. With how wealthy he was, $100 million was just a drop in the bucket to him. But to me, it was an astronomical number. Wasn't that just outright bullying? Jonathan didn't answer me. He just pinned me in place and opened the safe. Then, he reached over with his long arms and pulled out a contract. Look carefully, and don't say that I'm taking advantage of you, he said in a low and cold voice. I pursed my lips and started studying the contract, which turned out to be the prenuptial agreement we had signed. When I got to the key parts, my eyes bulged wide. If I want a divorce, then I'll compensate you $100 million. But if you want a divorce, you'll compensate me $100 billion? My head snapped up as I stared at Jonathan, the shock on my face as clear as day. Apparently, the crazy person here wasn't me, it was Jonathan. Have you lost your mind? Why would you sign such a prenup with me? Jonathan's gaze was heavy as he looked at me. You're the one who suggested we sign this. Impossible. I refuted him reflexively. Why would I do something as insane as this? Don't shift the blame on me, Jonathan. Amidst my emotional outburst, I had forgotten to hide the fact that I had lost my memories. Sure enough, Jonathan's voice turned dangerous when he asked, do you really not remember? Or are you just pretending? I inhaled a deep breath. The prenup was right in front of me, so even if I wanted to deny it, I couldn't ignore the fact that I had signed such a ridiculous agreement with him. What state of mind had I been in then to propose such clauses? Moreover, why on earth had Jonathan agreed to them? He knew that there was no way I could cough up $100 million, but he was a legitimate CEO with hundreds of billions in net worth. Why would he sign such an absurd agreement? After a few moments, I calmed down enough to look him in the eyes and said, just think of this as a joke. We were too young when we got married, and I didn't know my married life would turn out like this. So, let's just consider this agreement invalid. Jonathan's gaze was deep. You're regretting it? Yes, I'm regretting it, I replied. My lips pursed. His gaze turned cold instantly, as if there was a layer of ice across his eyes. No chance. This agreement has been notarized, so if you want a divorce, you'll need to pay me $100 million. I stared at him in disbelief. On what grounds? This agreement can't possibly be valid. If you wanted a divorce, would you have to pay me $100 billion? Jonathan only stared at me silently. I pressed my lips into a tight line. My adamant insistence on getting a divorce had been shattered by this prenup. $100 million. How could I possibly get that kind of money? Chapter 13. I left Jonathan's office in a daze, still reeling from the shock of the $100 million compensation. He had an international meeting to attend, and thus asked me to wait for him in the break room. I didn't want to, so he had Bob send me home instead. Even though I had lost my memories and couldn't remember the details of our life together these past few years, I could tell from our interactions these past few days that he was a very domineering man. Maybe it was because he was used to being in power, but there was always a slight condescending air about him. It was the same when he spoke to me. He didn't allow further explanations or objections, and he didn't allow anyone to make changes to his plans either. Still stunned by the $100 million compensation, I wasn't paying attention as I was walking through the corridor when a slender figure bumped into me. I snapped back to my senses and was about to apologize out of reflex, when I heard a cold snort. Serves you right. It was a familiar-sounding female voice. I looked up in surprise and saw a face I recognized. Gabrielle? I froze, looking at the woman who clearly held hostility toward me. When Gabrielle heard me say her name so casually, her expression turned oddly strange. The hostility she had shown earlier suddenly disappeared, as if it had been doused with water. "So, you do remember my name," she muttered, her tone still sour, but no longer antagonistic. I was very surprised. "You work at Millenia too?" Gabrielle Harrison was my college roommate. She came from a well-off family, and was a beauty with a tall stature and a certain aloofness about her. But once one got to know her, they'd find her very loyal and easy to talk to. She had been ostracized before, so she often gave off a don't mess with me vibe, which in turn made a lot of people dislike her. I, too, only realized she was actually a very good person after getting to know her. I had been feeling very insecure after losing my memories, and everything seemed confusing. Thus, I couldn't help but feel very excited to suddenly see someone familiar. Gabrielle, however, gave me an odd look. "I've worked here for 5 years. Why are you acting so surprised?" I inhaled a deep breath before glancing at Bob and composing myself. "Sorry, my emotions have been all over the place recently," I explained, brushing it off. Hearing that, she looked even more surprised and gave me a once-over. I was worried that Bob would suspect something, so I asked her, "Can we talk?" Bob instantly frowned. "Miss Sawyer, Mr. Ford asked me to send you home." Gabrielle's expression turned annoyed again when she heard this, but I merely retorted, "Jonathan isn't my father. Do I really need his permission just to speak to someone?" Gabrielle turned to look at me in shock, as if she were looking at a complete stranger. "Elise, you..." She seemingly had a lot of things to say, but after moving her lips a few times, she turned to Bob and said, "Mr. Bilber, I'll just chat with her for a bit." Bob frowned. He didn't outright refuse this, but he didn't agree either. After a long while, he finally said in a low voice, "Mr. Ford doesn't like you meeting with Miss Sawyer." I was very shocked to hear this. Gabrielle was my best friend. Who gave Jonathan the right to stop us from meeting? Unexpectedly, Gabrielle shot me a cold glance before turning to Bob and saying, "You heard her. She's the one who wants to talk to me." After a long deliberation, Bob finally gave in. When I followed Gabrielle into her office, I couldn't hold in my exclamations. "You even have your own office now, Gabrielle?" The moment those words left my mouth, her expression, which had softened a little earlier, turned dark again. "That's right. I got to where I am today on my own accord, and not by riding your coattails." "Surprised?" she asked passive-aggressively. Chapter 14. Gabrielle, who happened to be my best friend, was technically the first familiar face I had seen since waking up with amnesia. But I didn't even get to feel happy for long before she rained down on my parade with her attitude. I didn't know why she was treating me this way. It was like she held some sort of grudge against me. I couldn't help but take her hand and say sadly, "I'm sorry, Gabrielle. If I've done something wrong, please tell me. Don't be upset." She flung my hand off as if she'd been creeped out, then reached out to feel my forehead. "Elise, you're not running a fever, are you?" She then stared me right in the eyes as she continued, "You haven't spoken to me in 5 years. Weren't you content just clinging onto your Jonathan? What? Now that he doesn't want you anymore, you come running back to me?" From those few sentences, I managed to get a key piece of information we hadn't spoken in 5 years. Gabrielle's arms were crossed, and her tone was still upset. "I had been very happy for you two when you first got married, but Jonathan didn't like me taking up too much of your time, and he made you report your every move to him. I tolerated that as it was understandable that you two newlyweds needed your alone time, but I couldn't stand how cold he was to you. And when you were feeling sad about it, I told you that you didn't need to tie yourself down to just one man if you weren't happy. That was when he accused me of having bad intentions and forbade us from seeing each other again. Don't tell me I agreed to that," I retorted, shocked. She poked me a few times on the forehead. "If you hadn't, would we have ended up like this?" she asked with exasperation. This was when she suddenly looked at me in bewilderment. "Why don't you remember anything? Don't tell me your brain is waterlogged from falling into the pool?" I smiled bitterly. "Not waterlogged, But it's not far off either. She snorted coldly. I'm telling you, I have no intention of being your backup friend. You only thought of coming to me now that Jonathan dumped you, right? Why can't I be the one who wants to divorce him? I asked exasperatedly. A bitter chuckle escaped her. Do you think I'd believe that? You've completely lost all sense of self-respect while loving him. You gave up everything. And now you're saying you want to divorce him? I'm more inclined to believe that he dumped you because he wants to be with Alicia. You know about Alicia? I not only know about her, I also know that when you and she fell into the pool together, he unhesitatingly went to save her first. Gabrielle was quite furious at this point. Everyone in our circle is talking about it. You've turned into a laughing stock. Those words pricked at me, and I lowered my head, falling silent. She became even more agitated. You don't even know how to swim. And that piece of trash Jonathan knows it. You nearly drowned, she said, her eyes turning red. I looked at her helplessly. I took a step forward, wanting to comfort her, but she stubbornly avoided my hand. Right then, a cold voice rang out from the doorway. Elise, come here. Jonathan had arrived without us noticing, and he was stalking over slowly, each step ripe with tension. Didn't I tell you to wait for me at home? He asked, displeasure clear in his eyes. I drew a deep breath as I met his gaze. We're about to get divorced. Where I go has nothing to do with you, does it? Not only did Jonathan's expression instantly darken at my words, but Gabrielle also turned to stare at me like she'd just seen a ghost. You're really going to get a divorce? I ignored her and kept staring straight at Jonathan. You want $100 million? Fine. I'll find a way to get the money. Hopefully, you'll honor the agreement then and go through with the divorce. Chapter 15. Gabrielle was still in a state of shock even after Jonathan left. I sighed and walked up to her. I know you might not believe me, but I truly do want a divorce this time. The shock in her expression slowly settled. She looked at me, nodded, then said, I'm glad you've finally come to your senses. I pulled her to sit with me. We used to be best friends. What happened between us? How could I have ignored you just because of Jonathan? I asked. Also, I used to hate people who lost their brain cells when they fell in love. How could I have stayed married to someone like Jonathan all these years? And how did I even meet him in the first place? I fired off a bunch of questions, one after the other. She was Gabrielle Harrison. Even if we did go 5 years without interacting, I still trusted her implicitly. Though her attitude toward me earlier had been harsh, my instincts told me she would never hurt me. So I didn't hide anything. And I wasn't afraid of her finding out about my amnesia either. As expected, she studied me thoughtfully. I knew something was off about you from the start. Is your brain really waterlogged? When she asked that earlier, it had been an insult. But now, she was genuinely curious. I pursed my lips and lowered my head. Something like that, I answered vaguely, subconsciously. I didn't want her to know that I had tried to end my life. I knew she was mad at me for not loving myself more. She was my best friend, after all. It was only natural that she would be angry with me for how I ignored her advice, or how she was helpless to do anything when seeing how Jonathan demeaned me. She sighed. Let's not talk about that for now. I'm just glad that you've come to your senses. Oh, right. You mentioned $100 million earlier. What's that about? I told her about the prenup I had signed with Jonathan. She was very much stunned. Has he lost his mind? If the other shareholders found out he signed such an agreement with you, they'd definitely file a joint complaint. I shook my head. I have no idea what he was thinking about either. I grabbed her hand and continued. Gabrielle, what happened between me and Jonathan? I only remember having a crush on him. How on earth did I suddenly become his wife? I'm not exactly sure what happened between the two of you either. I only know that I was quite happy for you when you first married him. But after a while, you weren't happy anymore, and I tried to get you to talk things through with him. But when I witnessed how much agony the marriage was bringing you, I suggested you get a divorce. I never thought that when Jonathan found out, he'd forbid us from seeing each other anymore. I fell silent for a long time. When I finally broke the silence, it was to say, I'm sorry. Gabrielle stared at me, clearly still upset, but after a while, it seemed like she couldn't bear to hold it against me anymore. Forget it. You weren't bold and hadn't experienced any suffering. As for the 25-year-old Elise, she was nothing more than an annoying woman who had no sense of self. If I had a choice, I hoped I would never get my memories back and never revert to that person. Gabrielle was a professional lawyer now. She had me show her the prenup so she could review it. Thus, I had no choice but to go back to the Ford residence. As I was rummaging through Jonathan's desk in the study, I felt a warmth behind me as a broad chest pressed against me. A cold, deep voice rumbled next to my ear, the vibration tickling my eardrum. "What are you looking for?" "I like this me too, also. I like this version of you more." I snuggled against her shoulder playfully. "I was seriously worried you'd developed some mental illness," she finished, emotion clear in her eyes. The current me was the 18-year-old Elise who was fearless.